morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. As you know from the last few days, I've been traveling, so we've been doing these all-viewer question episodes. And this is the final one before I return tomorrow. So I have 3 questions picked out. That's the format for these all-viewer question episodes, 3 stories. And the first one is from Abdullah SAA about Dreamworks Animation. And Abdullah says, "Hello Grace, I have a question about Dreamworks Animation. With Mr. Peabody and Sherman and Turbo not doing so well at the box office, and How to Train Your Dragon 2 not doing as good as it should have, and having the studio's stock go down, and also if Penguins of Madagascar and Home do not do so well, and also Boo, the Bureau of Otherworldly Operations, if it doesn't do so well, especially because it didn't have any representation at Comic-Con for the Dreamworks Animation panel, do you think that Dreamworks Animation maybe should do the same thing that Studio Ghibli is doing? And that is taking some time to fix itself and improve. Or will it be worse for Dreamworks Animation to take that break?" Then also Abdullah says, "But at least How to Train Your Dragon 2 will probably get an Oscar nomination and maybe even win. Thanks." Smiley faces. All right, Abdullah, that's a great question, and Dreamworks Animation is something that's certainly on a lot of people's minds these days. Because it has a lot of fans, I think it's underestimated and underappreciated in the quality of its product, but it's still struggling at the box office, that's when things start to get serious. I mean, it's one thing to have a difference of opinion, but when the numbers aren't there, as you said, Abdullah, the stock starts to go down. Now, I think since Abdullah's question, How to Train Your Dragon 2 has rallied, it's the highest grossing animated film for the year so far, with $500 million over that mark, and also, that's helped Dreamworks Animation stock go back up a little bit. But still, it's still a little bit in the danger zone. Now, I want to talk about Dreamworks Animation and then also these Oscar prospects, because I think that's also a really interesting conversation. As for Dreamworks Animation, should they take a break to kind of reboot? I wouldn't say so. And the only reason that Studio Ghibli is taking a break is, I think, to transition over to computer animation. And that's a very big change. I mean, we saw Disney Animation go through the same process a couple of years ago. They've come out the other side quite successfully, but it was a painful and slow process nonetheless. And by come out the other side, I mean, of course, they have frozen over $1 billion at the box office, and one of their biggest hits, and one of the most successful animated films, obviously, of all time, and just plain films. So that's phenomenal. Dreamworks Animation would love to have a hit at that level, and I think they should, and it's a shame that they don't yet. They certainly are producing that content. Now, as we always say, it's really the fault of their publicity department. Nobody ever realizes how great the films are that they're putting out there. I just watched Megamind the other day, and it's fantastic. Really well done. Very smart film, and considering how popular superhero movies are right now, it should have done better than it did. But I think that, again, Dreamworks Animation's publicity department just isn't able to get the message out there, and these movies have to rely entirely on word of mouth, or almost entirely. So if anything needs to reboot, I'd say it's their PR, and not just reboot. I'd say clean house, get some new talent in there, and just see, no offense to the people who are currently working there, but they clearly can't get the job done, at least at the level that Dreamworks Animation needs them to. As for, I wouldn't reset, but I think that the one thing that Dreamworks Animation might be missing is heart. I think they have very smart films, and they do have great emotional arcs for their characters, but they don't really have that clarity like a Pixar in its heyday. Think of films like Wall-E or Up, films that almost seem like Oscar contenders. And I think that Dreamworks Animation is so concerned with, getting in the all-ages audience with a lot of funny jokes, the all-star voice casts, that they miss a little bit of the chance to, have that emotional beat that they can really sell the film on, not just to audiences, but critics and, just the overall perception of how their films come across. Right now, they're a little too mainstream, I guess, is what I would say. Now, mainstream, of course, is important, but again, they're missing that heart that's going to give them the respectability that they need across the board. So that's what I would say they need to tweak in terms of their creative side. Now, as for their chances for an Oscar, it is a pretty open year this year, but the problem is with the animation Oscars, we've discussed before, is that they don't really give it on terms of quality of film. I think because the people who are voting for it don't really watch animation and don't really respect the field, they usually give it to the film that's the most popular. They're like, well, I could watch these, but you know what? I'm going to give it to the one that my kid or my grandkid keeps talking about all the time, or that I see in the headlines. And that's why I think you see the box office hit win, or if there's a Pixar contender, they just give it to that automatically. For instance, a lot of people thought that Brave didn't deserve to win, but I think a lot of the voters were like, hey, you know what? It's Pixar. You know, I think a lot of stop motion's been overlooked tragically in favor of the bigger movies. Now, speaking of stop motion, I think that's a real threat to DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon 2 getting the Oscar with Box Trolls. Maybe this will be Leica's year. They certainly would like to get in there, and they deserve it. They're very talented animation studio, so I would love to see Box Trolls be a serious contender. At the same time, though, I don't think Box Trolls is going to be a big hit at the box office, and again, that kind of attention is what, unfortunately, drives the votes for the Academy. So the only real competition is Big Hero 6. Now, Frozen was so popular and, of course, did win the Oscar, I think largely because of that popularity, although I know a lot of you like the film, but I think that it was so flawed, I have a hard time believing it deserves Best Animated Feature to get the actual gold. I mean, it wasn't Best Marketing Campaign or Best Song. I mean, it totally deserved Best Song, which it also got. Those are Oscars I think it deserved. But it got Best Picture, Best Animated Feature, I think, because of just the popularity and the way the Academy votes. So Big Hero 6, although I have very high hopes for Big Hero 6, you could see that being a massive hit for Disney, you know, especially considering the global box office and the Academy then being swayed by that. I think How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a very good film. I think it's not as good as the first film. I think it's a little flawed, it's a little overcrowded, it's a little rushed, but it is poignant. It does have more heart than your average DreamWorks film, and I would like to see DreamWorks take the Oscar home. They've won in the past. They have won the Best Animated Feature Oscar. But I guess if I had to pick, I'd kind of like to see it go to Leica for Box Trolls, because I think that stop motion isn't quite getting the attention it needs, and its box office is waning a little bit, and I don't want to see it disappear. All right, so that's the first question of the day. Thank you, Abdullah. The second is from Tom Wood 555. And Tom Wood says, hey Grace, I think I will take advantage of all this viewer question episodes and ask a question. Good thing to roll the dice, Tom, because you got picked. And Tom continues saying, in the past, movie sequels for the most part have been embarrassing to the original films, such as Jaws 2, Speed 2, being examples. But now sequels seem to be far superior than the original films, such as The Hunger Games, The Dark Knight. Why do filmmakers and producers struggle to set strong groundwork? Why are sequels given far more care and attention and publicity than the original films are? Are we entering the era of sequels, or is it Hollywood making sure they don't go back to their old ways? Very interesting question, Tom, and I think there are a couple of factors here. I think on the one hand, you're just focusing, as you can see, on these genre films. Catching Fire, I think, does go in the same category. Universe building. You know, films that aren't meant to be one-offs. As soon as they make this first movie, the studio is keenly aware that they have a lot more in the pipeline to make. So I think that's one of the reasons. So the first film has a lot to do. It has a lot to accomplish. It has to lay the foundation. Instead of where other situations like Jaws or Speed, they had no idea there was going to be a sequel to those movies. They just wanted to make a good movie. They had to put it all on the table right there. But when you have these new films coming out, they're like, we have to save something for the sequel. We have to tease the sequel. So, you know, they're not putting it all out there on the table, and they're just, you know, trying to lay the groundwork to hook you. Now, the other reason you have a problem is that while we're exploring the world, this talent is also getting their footing, getting their bearings. You have largely a new director. I mean, think about it. Christopher Nolan and Bryan Singer, one of the reasons their sequels were so much better is that they had already gotten their practice in on the first film. I'm against this policy of bringing in such newbie talent on these big blockbusters. Let them go cut their teeth somewhere else. Only bring in someone who's experienced. I mean, I think Casino Royale got off to such a good start because they had Martin Campbell directing. And he's a fantastic James Bond director who has not only a lot of action experience, but experience with this exact franchise. So I think that's why he's able to get it off to such a good start. But although, to Sam Mendes' credit, with Skyfall, that was his first big action movie, and he really hit the ground running. Although, yet again, I would expect his sequel, Bond 24, to be even better, because now the training wheels are off. He really can stretch his legs and go for broke. So I think that's one instance. Your director is often learning. They get this new, you know, indie talent or a really prestigious talent to try and up the credibility of this potential franchise, but that person, the downside is, has to learn the ropes. So that's one reason a sequel is better. Also, your screenwriters They're learning the characters. They're adapting a book. I bet often one that they don't have a ton of respect for. So that's another instance why the first film is better. Although a good example was Pirates of the Caribbean. That became a franchise, although they didn't know it was going to be a huge franchise that would have multiple films. And that was another situation where they put it all on the table. And also, I think because they didn't know there was a sequel pending, Johnny Depp was allowed to experiment a little bit more. I think that's another situation. They play it safe for the first films. And then for the second one, they're like, well, this is where we can really cut loose. And that's also, I think, become a little bit of the pattern, where maybe even they go into it that way. Well, the first film will just establish everything. We'll get all our pieces into position, and then we can really play. Think of it that way. Remember when you were a kid? When I was a kid, it would take my sister and I an entire day to set up our toys because we were so ornate in what we were putting together. And I think that's what's going on with a movie. Really, the first film is just the setup, and then you can really start to put everything into action to literally play with your toys in the second film. I think it's a problem, and I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of franchises don't get off the ground, and I think Hollywood needs to stop assuming that there's going to be a sequel. I think it's a mistake, and they should always put their best foot forward, and I don't like this training on big productions. But I think that's why what's happening. Just the way the structure has changed, the needs of Hollywood, and that people go into these franchises knowing they're going to be 4, 5, 6, maybe even more in terms of how many films they're going to be producing. So thank you for your question, Tom. Now on to Jimmy Vermeer for our third question. And Jimmy says, "Hiya, Grace. Question. I live in the Netherlands, and sometimes when a movie is released in the US, I have to wait a couple of months to see the movie. Why do we need to wait a lot of time to see a new movie in Europe?" That's a great question, Jimmy. I believe I've gotten it before, but I think it's, it never hurts to reiterate the reasons because I think it's really annoying for a lot of you out there, and I know it's annoying for us here in the States when you get a movie before us. Not only do you have to wait, but it's really hard to avoid spoilers, etc. Now, because of the global market and because there's so much box office in other countries, we're starting to see this practice go away. You're seeing more day-and-date releases worldwide, not only to capitalize on making a movie a big event, but also to combat piracy. I think that's another reason. So this is a situation that I believe is going away, but it's still happening, so I think it's worth discussing. So, Jimmy, there are a couple of reasons. One is that, not only in the US we get very few foreign films, but in other parts of the world, Hollywood has to compete with the local product. So they have to, there's a strategy to release dates. So in the US, they really only have to compete with their own products and get out of their own way. But in other countries, they have to be like, well, I would have released my movie on this date because I'm releasing it here in the United States, but then this big local film is coming out. I don't want to get in its way. Then another situation, so that's one, local films being in the mix. And also films from other parts in the world. The United States is pretty much the only country that doesn't really showcase other countries' films in the mainstream movie market. It's always in the specialty market, which is a shame. I hope to see that change as well someday. So that's one. The second problem is different holidays, different school schedules. Certain films, they want to make sure everybody's out for vacation so that more families can go, let's say. Or if it's just a holiday weekend, more people want to go to the movies that weekend. And every country has different holidays. So that's another reason. For instance, a lot of movies are released here in the United States for, say, President's Day or President's Weekend or Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. But those are holidays in January and February. Not a big deal in the rest of the world, so they're not going to do that. Also, summer vacations are different, school breaks. So that's another reason you see a different release schedule. And then also, sometimes they like to use the headlines. They want it to be a big hit in the United States so that you and other countries see that headline and go, well, maybe I wasn't going to see this movie, but now I will because so many people have already seen it, and it's kind of a way to vouch for the film. That's also being used in the reverse. That's why sometimes a film will open overseas to get these big headlines and the rest of the world. So the US is like, wow, that looks like it's a big deal. Look how much money it's made already before it even hit here. I want to go see it too. Now, it's not as big a span of a couple of months like you're talking about, Jimmy. You're usually talking about a week or two in that regard. So that's another reason. So you have three things. You've got local competition or other competition. You've got different holiday and school schedules. And then also you have, wanting to do kind of strategy in terms of buzz. So that's the reason that you don't see films released all at once. And also a fourth is also actors' schedules. Actors have to go and publicize these films, go on talk shows. I'm sure you've seen them in your local market. And they can't be everywhere at once. So they have to have a world tour to hit the different countries, and obviously they want the movie to come out at that time. For the big movies, they do it fast and furiously. They hit all the countries like in a matter of a week, and X-Men was great because they had such a big cast, as you might recall. They split up so they could hit countries, different countries across the globe simultaneously. And Hunger Games Catching Fire also had a very big promotional tour worldwide, but that also happened very quickly. So that's a fourth reason. So also star schedules. And then in that regard, if a star isn't available because they're shooting another project, in some of the smaller markets, they might wait to release the film until the actor can take a break to promote it. So thank you so much for your question, Jimmy. Thank you, Abdullah, Tom, and Jimmy. Thank you for your questions today. I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you so much, but continue to ask questions because I do bank them even if they're not answered the very next day. And I'm sure we'll have more viewer question episodes coming up soon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.